Pollyanna, Chapter 15, Dr. Chilton. The great pile of mansory looked very different to Pollyanna when she made a second visit to the house of Mr. John Pendleton. The windows were open, an elderly woman was hanging clothes in the backyard, and the Dr. Jig stood under the portico. As before, Pollyanna went to the side door. This time she rang the bell. Her fingers were not stiff today from a tight clutch on a bunch of keys. A familiar-looking small dog bounded up the step to greet her, but there was a slight delay before the woman, who had been hanging out the clothes, opened the door. "If you please, I brought some codfish jelly from Mr. Pendleton," smiled Pollyanna. "Thank you," said the woman, reaching for the bowl in the little girl's hand. "Who shall I say sent it?" "And it's a codfish jelly." The doctor came in the hall at the moment, heard the woman's words, and saw the disappointed look on Pollyanna's faces. He stepped quickly forward. "Ah, some codfish jelly," he asked genially. "That will be fine. Maybe you would like to see our patient, eh?" "Oh, yes, sir," beamed Pollyanna, and the woman in the obedience to a nod from the doctor led the way through the hall at once, through plainly the vast surprise on our faces. Behind the doctor, a young man, a trained nurse from the nearest city, gave a disturbed exclamation. "But, doctor, didn't Mr. Pendleton give order not to admit anyone?" "Oh, yes," nodded the doctor, "but I'm giving order now. I'll take the risk." Then he added whimsically, "You don't know, of course, but that little girl is better than a 6-quart bottle of tonic any days. If anything or anybody can take a ground that of Pendleton this afternoon, she can. That's why I sent her in." "Who is she?" For one brief moment the doctor hesitated. "She's the niece of one of the best-known president. Her name is Pollyanna Whitter. I don't happen to enjoy a very extensive personal acquaintance with the lady as yet, but lots of my patients do, I'm thankful to say." The nurse smiled. "Indeed, and what are the special ingredients of those wonder-working tonic of hers?" The doctor shook his head. "I don't know. As near as I can find, it is overwhelming, unquenchable gladness of everything that has happened or is going to happen. At any rate, her quaint speech are constantly being repeated to me, and as near as I can make out, just being glad is the tenor of most of them. All is," he added with another whimsical smile, as he stepped out on the porches, "he wished I could prescribe hers and buy her as I would a box of pills, though if there gets so many of her in the world, you and I might as well go to the ribbon selling and ditch and digging for all the money we'll get out of the nursing and doctoring." He laughed, picking up the reins and stepping into the gig. Pollyanna, meanwhile, in accordance with the doctor's orders, was being escorted to John Pendleton's rooms. Her way led through the great library at the end of the hall, and rapid as was her progress through it, Pollyanna saw at once the great change that had taken place. The book-lined walls and crimson curtain were the same, but there was litter on the floor, no untidiness on the desk, and not so much as a grain of dust in sight. The telephone card hung in its proper place, and the brass ends had been polished. One of the mysterious doors was open, and it was toward this that the maid led the way. A moment later, Pollyanna found herself in the sumptuous furnished bedroom, while the maid was saying in a frightened voice, "If you please, sir, here's a little girl with some jelly. The doctor said I was to bring her in." The next moment Pollyanna found herself alone with a very cross-looking man lying flat on his back in a bed. "See here, didn't I say?" began an angry voice. "Oh, it's you!" It broke off not very graciously as Pollyanna advanced toward the bed. "Yes, sir," smiled Pollyanna. "Oh, I'm so glad they let me in. You see, at first the lady most took my jelly, and I was so afraid I wasn't going to see you at all. Then the doctor came, and he said I might. Wasn't he lovely to let me in and see you?" In spite of himself, the man's lips twitched into a smile, but all he said was, "Humph! But I've brought you some jelly," resumed Pollyanna. "Cough it. I hope you like it." There's a rising inflection in her voice. Never ate it. The fleeting smile had gone, and the scowl had come back to the man's faces. For a moment, instant, Pollyanna's countenance showed disappointment, but in clear she set the bowl of jelly down. Didn't you? Well, if you didn't, then you can't know you don't like it. Anyhow, can you? So I reckon I'm glad you have it after all. Now, if you knew, yes, well, there's one thing I know all right, and that is that I'm flat on my back right here in this minute, and that I'm illegal to stay here. Stay doomsday, I guess. Pollyanna looked shocked. Oh no, it couldn't be doomdays. You know, when the angel Gabriel blows trumpet, unless it should come quicker than we think it will. Well, oh, of course, I know the Bible said it may come quicker than we think, but I don't think it will. That is, of course, I believe the Bible, but I don't think it will come as much quicker as I thought. It would if it wouldn't some now, and John Pendleton laughed suddenly and loud. The nurse coming in that moment heard the laugh and beat a hurried but a very silent retreat. He had the air of a frightened cook who, seeing the danger of the breath of cold air striking a half-done cake, hastily shut the oven door. Aren't you getting a little mixed? Asked John Pendleton of Pollyanna. The little girl laughed. Maybe, but what I mean is that legs don't last. Broken one, you know, like lifelong invalids, some as Mrs. Noah's got. So your won't last till doomdays at all. I should think you could be glad of that. Oh, I am, retorted the man grimly. And you didn't break one, but you can be glad it wasn't two. Pollyanna was warming to her task. Of course, so fortunate, sniffed the man with uplifted eyebrow, looking at it from a standpoint. I suppose I might be glad I wasn't centipeded and didn't break 50. Pollyanna chuckled. Oh, that's the best yet, she crowed. I know that a centipede is. They've got lots of leg, and you can be glad. Oh, of course, interrupted the man sharply, all the old bitterness coming back to her voice now. I can be glad, too, for all the rest. I suppose the nurse and the doctor and the confounded woman in the kitchen. Why, yes, sir. I only think how bad it would be if you didn't have them. Well, he demanded sharply. Well, why, I say only think how bad it would be if you didn't have him and you lying here like this. As if that wasn't the very thing that was all the bottom of the whole matter, retorted the man testily, because I'm lying here like this. And yet you expect me to say I'm glad because a fool woman who discharged the whole house and call it reluctanting, and the man who aids and abets her in it and call it nursing, to say nothing of the doctor, eggs and both on the whole bunch of them. Meanwhile, expecting me to pay for them, and pay them well too. Pollyanna frowned sympathetically. Yes, I know that part is too bad, but the money, when you've been saving it too all this time. When saving it, buying beans and fishball, you know. Say, do you like beans or do you like turkey beater? Only an account of 60 cents. Look here, child. What are you talking about? Pollyanna smiled randomly. About your money, you know, denying yourself and saving it to the heaven. You see, I found out about it. Why, Mr. Pendleton, that's one of the way I knew you weren't cross inside. Nancy told me. The man jaw dropped. Nancy told you I was saving money for the... Well, I may acquire who Nancy is. Oh, Nancy, she worked for Aunt Polly. Aunt Polly. Well, who is Aunt Polly? She's Miss Polly Harrington. I live with her. The man made a sudden movement. Miss Polly Harrington, he breathed. You live with her? Yes, I'm her niece. She's taken me to bring up on account of my mother. You know, flattered Pollyanna in a low voice. She was her sister, and after father went to be with her and the rest of us in heaven, there wasn't anyone left for me down here but the ladies' aides. So she took me. The man did not answer. His face, as lay back on the pillow now, was very white, so white that Pollyanna was frightened. She rose uncertainly to her feet. I reckon maybe I'd better go now, she proposed. I hope you'd like the jelly. The man turned his head suddenly and opened his eyes. There was a curious longing in the dark depth of which even Pollyanna saw, and which he marveled. And so you are Miss Polly Harrington, niece, he said gently. Yes, sir. Still the man with dark eyes lingered on her face until Pollyanna, feeling vagably, restlessly, murmured, I suppose you know her? John Pendleton's lips curved into an odd smile. Oh, yes, I know her. He hesitated, then went on, still with a curious smile. But you don't mean you can't see that it was Miss Polly Harrington who sent that jelly to me, he said slowly. Pollyanna looked distressed. No, sir, she didn't. She said I must be very sure not to let you think she sent it, but I thought as much. vouchsafed the man, shortly turning away his head. And Pollyanna, still more distressed, tiptoed from the room. Under the porch coche, she found the doctor waiting in his gig. The nurse stood on the step. "Well, Miss Pollyanna, may I have the pleasure of seeing you home?" asked the doctor smilingly. "I started to drive on a few minutes ago, then it occurred me that I'll wait for you." "Thank you, sir. I'm glad you did. I just love to ride," beamed Pollyanna as he reached out his hand to help her in. "Do you?" smiled the doctor, nodding his head in farewell to the young man on the step. "Well, as near as I can judge, there are a good many things you'd love to do," he added as they drove briskly away. Pollyanna laughed. "Why, I don't know. I reckon perhaps there's art," she admitted, like to do most everything's at living. Of course, I don't like the other thing very well, sewing and reading out loud and all that, but they aren't living." "No, what are they then?" "Aunt Polly said they're learning to live," sighed Pollyanna with a rueful smile. The doctor smiled now a little queerly. "Does she? Well, I should think she might say just that." "Yes," responded Pollyanna, "but I don't see it that way at all. I don't think you have to learn how to live. I did, anyhow." The doctor drew a long sigh. "After all, I'm afraid some of us do have to, little girl," he said. Then for a time he was silent. Pollyanna, stealing a glance at him, his felt vaguely sorry for him. He looked so sad. She wished uneasily that she could do something. It was this, perhaps, that caused her to say in a timid voice, "Dr. Chilton, I should think of being a doctor would be a very gladdest kind of business there was." The doctor turned in surprise. "Gladys, when I see much suffering always everywhere I go," he cried. She nodded. "I know that you're helping it. You don't see it. And of course you're glad to help it and see that make the gladdest of any of us all the time." The doctor's eyes filled with sudden hot tears. The doctor's life was a singularly lonely one. He had no wife and no home, save his 2-room office in a boarding house. His profession was very dear to him. Looking now into Pollyanna's shining eyes, he felt as if loving hands had been suddenly laid on his head in blessing. He knew, too, that never again would a long day work on a long night, weariness be quite without a new-found exhalation that had come to him through Pollyanna's eyes. "God bless you, little girl," he said unsteadily. Then with a bright smile his patient knew and loved so well, he added, "I'm thinking, after all, that it was doctor, quite as much as patient, that needed a draught of that tonic," although which puzzled Pollyanna very much, until a chipmunk running across the road dropped the whole matter her mind. The doctor left Pollyanna at her own door, smiled Nancy, who was sweeping up the front porch, then drove rapidly away. "I've perfectly beautiful ride with the doctor," announced Pollyanna, bounding up the steps. "He's lovely, Nancy." "Is he?" "Yes, I told him I should think his business would be the gladdest one there was. What, going to see sick folks and folks what ain't sick but they is, which is worse?" Nancy's face showed open skepticism. Pollyanna laughed gleefully. "Yes, that's most of what he said too, but there's a way to be glad even then. Guess." Nancy found impedimation. Nancy was getting so she could play this game of being glad quite successfully, she thought. She rather enjoyed studying out Pollyanna posed her to, so she called it some of the little girl question. "Oh, I know," she chuckled. "It's just the opposite from what you told Miss Snow." "Opposite?" repeated Pollyanna, obviously puzzled. "Yes, you told her she could be glad because all the folks wasn't like her. All sick, you know." "Yes," nodded Pollyanna. "Well, the doctor can be glad because he isn't like other folks. The sick one, I mean, when he's a doctor's," finished Nancy in triumph. It was Pollyanna's turn to frown. "Why, yes," she admitted. "Of course that is one way, but it isn't the way I said. And some way, I don't seem to quite like the sound of it. It isn't exactly as if he said he was glad they were sick, but you do play the game so funny sometime, Nancy," she sighed as she went into the houses. Pollyanna found her aunt in the sitting room. "Who is that man? The one who drove into the yard, Pollyanna?" questioned the lady sharply. "Why, Aunt Polly, that was Dr. Chilton. Didn't you know him?" "Dr. Chilton? What was he doing here?" "He drove me home. Oh, and I gave the jelly to Mr. Pendleton and—" Miss Polly lifted her head quickly. Pollyanna, he did not think I sent it. Oh no, Aunt Polly, I told him you didn't. Miss Polly grew sudden vivid pink. You told him I didn't. Miss Pollyanna opened wide her eyes at the remonstrative dismay in her aunt voice. Why, Aunt Polly, you said to. Aunt Polly signed. I said, Pollyanna, that I did not send it for you to be sure, very sure that he did not think I did, which is a very different matter from telling him outright that I did not send it. She turned very vexedly away. Dear me, well, I don't see where the difference is, sighed Pollyanna as she went to hang on her hat on the one particularly hook in the house upon which Aunt Polly had said that it must be hung.